of recording is so that others who could not join today will be able to listen to the webinar on their own time later on. And also that if you have any questions throughout the presentations, please put them in the chat. We'll be addressing them after the panelists are finished. So with that, over to you, Helen.
مرحبا. تمام، شو الأخبار؟ روحتي هلا من بيت لحم؟
Thank you, Pablo. I'm actually going to take over first and then hand over to Helen in a minute. I want to say thank you all for attending. It's exciting to see that we have 67 and counting participants in this webinar. Before we get into it, I want to offer some important thanks and acknowledge contributions of some key champions to the development of this work and supporting the approach that we've taken. Firstly, I want to thank Liz Palmer from Save the Children. I want to thank Phil Deloy from FCDO, who will be speaking a little bit later, Jim Kennedy, Charles Kelly, and also I want to thank the Global Shelter Cluster and Construction Standards Working Group, as well as our generous donors, BHA and FCDO, and of course IFRC for all your support as well. So thank you so much. There are a lot more names as well, people who supported this project through giving contributions of their time and energy, but I just wanted to highlight a few quick names in the beginning, so thank you to all of you. We don't have much time today. We have an hour in total, so we're going to focus on key findings and recommendations from this research and work. We're not going to give much information about methodology and how we arrived in these, but please do engage with the reports, right? So this is a launch. We hope that you find these resources to be really useful. We'll be here to continue supporting you and applying them and even developing things further. Next slide, please. I want to start out with a quote from a Yazidi woman. Today was worse than the 3rd of August 2014 when ISIS attacked us. This woman was referring to a fire that had happened in her camp. This quote is from a woman experiencing fire after already experiencing some of the worst of conflict, highlighting the traumatic nature of fire and the importance of social and contextual dynamics in how we approach the problem. As a fire engineer who's been working on issues related to fire in informal settlements and humanitarian settlements for the past 9 years, I don't have the tools and approaches to try to understand this perspective. The reason that I started Kindling was because I knew that we needed to bring many different perspectives together and begin to understand contextual aspects, social aspects, political aspects, all these different kind of dimensions that shape how fire risk emerges, how people experience fire, and what the sector can actually do to respond to that issue. So I'm going to hand over very quickly to my colleague, Helen Underhill. As Pablo introduced Helen, she's a social scientist and an educator. I'm a fire engineer. We also have disaster studies specialists, people with extensive experience in the humanitarian and development sectors, geographers, both physical and human, and many other disciplines that have contributed to this work beyond the Kindling team and including it. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of your contributions, or everyone on the call that has contributed. I've seen lots of names of people behind the research already joining. So thank you so much, and over to you, Helen.
Thanks, Danielle. And thank you to everybody for coming to the launch today. So just to start really quickly then, Danielle has outlined, given a brief introduction to why we're here, why Kindling exists. But we want to just give some more flavour of the report and the guidance and basically highlight some of the issues that have come up through the research. I should say straight away, we're not here to give you quantifiable data. We can't quantify the problem. One of the findings from this research is that the data isn't being recorded. Incidents and impacts of fire aren't being recorded, but we know that the problem is significant. We also want to stress that there is a lot to learn by engaging with people, by analysing past fires, understanding the built environment, the materials, the shelters, settlement design, planning. We need to bring all of those perspectives together. And we at Kindling do this analysis from a fire perspective, but importantly, we do this thinking about how social, technical and operational knowledges of fire come together. So to kind of help structure our brief presentation, we're going to just introduce the nature of the problem, so why fires happen. Why does this problem persist? Like, why is it continuing even though we know that it happens? And what can be done about it? So what can different actors do? And we'll talk briefly here about the idea of responsibility. I think I'm moving on. Okay, so to explore those questions, we engaged with a wide range of actors across the sector, exploring different types of knowledge and knowledges, technical, operational, social. And we have produced a baseline. It's groundbreaking, and we're calling it the State of Fire Safety in Humanitarian Shelter and Settlements. And by establishing this baseline, we then went on to present some strategic recommendations and practical guidance. So we have two big documents. The guidance will be some of the biggest, the longest guidance that you've seen, but there's also some foundational knowledge in there around fire engineering that we hope that people will engage with. So this project was all about creating strategic ways forward and offering practical advice to support people working in humanitarian operations across the world. Importantly, these strategic recommendations start an important conversation about how to reduce the incidents and impacts of fire in the future. In the report, you will get lots of information about how we did the work, and I would really encourage you to engage with the significant amount of qualitative data that we've got, accounts from people working across the sector, that give really detailed, thoughtful and reflective perspectives from across shelter, WASH, CCCM, in logistics, so many different parts, and from practitioners through to people who've worked across the world as well. We also offer a comprehensive literature review, which has never been done before, which was completed by John Twigg, who has huge amounts of experience in disaster risk reduction. And I would really recommend engaging with that if you want to see what research has been done, and get a kind of summary of some of those documents. And then we also offer 11 strategic recommendations, which I will outline very, very briefly at the end. We hope that you'll leave today and want to dive into the report and also get involved in some of our other work. The guidance is the first edition, and we hope that one of the ways that people on this call might want to engage is by keeping in touch with us there and be part of hopefully a second edition, which we want to be far more contextualized. And please do have a look at the introduction to fire engineering. So I'm going to try and give you a very brief introduction to some of the work. The nature of the problem. Many of you, this won't be new to you. We know that fire risk and fires start because of shelter materials, the construction, seasonality, access to fuel, roads, access to fire services, settlement location, layout, design. And it's important to acknowledge that daily life interacts with all of those things. For example, as families grow, people are living in settlements for much longer than they are perhaps initially designed for. And so therefore they adapt. We are thinking about this problem not in terms of just how a settlement is created in its first iteration, but how it changes throughout the life cycle of the shelter and the settlement, because the fire risk changes with that. Importantly, the problem also concerns agency buildings. When a fire happens here, it significantly impacts the ability of teams to provide assistance. So it's not just about the shelters that are being provided and the settlements that affected populations live in. It's also about all the buildings that support the humanitarian operations. So this image here, we've taken it from the report, and for us it's a really key one to show why the problem persists. The problem of fires in humanitarian shelter and settlements is not so intractable that nothing can be done. There are things that can be done. This image highlights that there are many moments within the creation and management of a planned camp where fire risk could be managed and minimised. And that red arrow at the top shows the different stages where fire could be considered and how the risk grows and becomes and emerges as an unmanaged fire risk if not paid attention to. So, for instance, where fire risk is not considered in a needs assessment, and then not within a shelter and settlements plan, and then not within site selection or within planning, within design, procurement, etc., the fire risk cascades and grows further within the system. By missing these opportunities to manage fire risk, humanitarian programming can unintentionally create more fire problems. In other parts of the sector, this would be called a failure. It's not possible to reduce the risk of fire to zero. It's a common kind of phrase that I have heard since working on this issue since 2017, that where there are humans, there is the risk of fire. But the light blue arrow at the bottom represents the risk when fire safety principles are embedded into how a camp is designed and built and managed and adapted. And we want to get to a point where the idea that fire risk travels through the system, that everybody considers what they can do about it. So what can different actors do? Where are the different lines of responsibility? Another image from our report and the guidance. The idea of unmanaged fire risk highlights a clear reason why the problem persists. There is lack of clarity around responsibility and a lack of connection between the different people and the different actors with different knowledge, different expertise that can contribute. So at the moment, there are silos, people working in different pockets and all putting their approach onto the problem. What we actually know from looking at research around informal settlements is that actually what there needs to be is connection between those different knowledges. I would challenge everybody within this room to consider where you sit within the fire emergent system and think about the knowledge that you have or need to think about fire safety in your role. Is it that you have more of a connection to the physical sciences and how fire might behave, or the materials in relation to and how they relate to the physical environment? Or operational knowledge, what happens during a fire, how to respond from a fire, or the firefighting perspective. Those two types of knowledge are really key, they're really critical, but neither of them tell us how fire is experienced before, during, or after the fire, or how it might relate to somebody's previous experience. To take us back to the image that and the quote that Danielle showed at the very beginning, how someone experiences fire when they've already experienced significant trauma is something we need to pay attention to, because it can impact how we decide to conduct operations, response, how we should be thinking about the physical construction of shelters and settlements. We also need the experiential and social knowledge to understand human behaviour, why people behave in different ways in different contexts. Importantly, we put all of these into a context, how the physical environment changes in different contexts, how different social conditions and social norms might change the possibilities for a particular type of operation or intervention. We have learned a great deal from looking to informal settlement research, but we know that these solutions have to be put into the context of the humanitarian sector to ensure that any solutions are fit for purpose for each context. In short, there is no silver bullet. There is not one solution, but there are things we can do if we can work collaboratively across disciplines and across areas of expertise. So, the The problem's complex, yes. And what does that mean? Well, alongside the guidance, which details a range of actions and recommendations for topics, and you'll see that on the left of your screen, we've produced 11 strategic recommendations. So the guidance you will find on socio-technical context, fire safety education, prevention, fire detection and alarm, evacuation, minimising shelter and building fire severity, minimising fire spread, firefighting, search and rescue, and importantly, an area that some of our other research shows, post-fire, which is often what communities have told us seems to be neglected, but for them is actually really critical. Our strategic recommendations highlight that there is something that everyone can do, but there needs to be a more strategic approach. Each of our recommendations outlines where we currently are, where we want to be, the challenges of getting there, and some next steps. And I would really encourage you to have a look at those strategic recommendations and dive into the report and see the different ways that you can contribute. If you would like to be part of these conversations, share and learn with others about putting the guidance into action or to shape the strategic direction of this work, please get in touch. I'm going to show you a screen now with my email address and the official logo for a new global community of practice around fire safety. And you do not have to be experienced or working on the issue of fire specifically, but you do have to have an interest in working with and learning from other people. If you want to know more, please email me to get more information. There is the launch logo for the fire in Daba, which means in Xhosa and Zulu, it means a place to gather to talk about an important issue. Please do get in touch if you'd like to be involved or to go on the list to learn more. It will be a global community of practice, and it's going to be an important next step for us to take the work forward. That's it from Kindling for our kind of formal part, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go to our generous and funders who have made this work possible. So a thanks from me for that as well.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks for that. And obviously, if anyone has any question, please feel free to put them on the chat. We will have time for questions later on if you'd like to look into specifically some of those recommendations or anything else that may have tickled your curiosity throughout Helen's presentation, please do put it in the chat. Before that, we would like to hear the perspectives from the two main donors of this initiative. And we will start with Phil Duloy. Phil is a member of the Humanitarian Stabilization Operations team of the UK. He's an advisor on shelter, CCCM, and HLP, Housing, Land and Property, to the UK's FCDO, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. That's his official title, but we all know Phil from way before his role in FCDO. And thankfully, he has a lot of operational experience as well, and he's able to bring that prior experience to his role now advising one of the key donors in the humanitarian shelter and settlement sector. So thank you very much, Phil, for joining us today, and over to you.
Thanks a million, Pablo. So I recently spoke with David Alexander, who's a professor in humanitarian and risk management. Some of you may have read his work or know him personally. I was preparing for an unrelated event about earthquakes and governance. And I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but he said something along the lines of the following: giving time to recovery is wise for social and scientific reasons. Rushed recovery that focuses on one hazard has resulted, even in very developed economies, to increased exposure to others. And I think that's really true and speaks to why we're here today. We need to get to a point where the consideration of fire risks is second nature and an implicit part of our thinking on shelter and settlements. And we have a long way to go. But Kindling's work, assuming that we collectively action it appropriately and in concert with those we're there to assist, can take us a good distance in the right direction. I wish we'd had them sooner, and that's no shade on Kindling, of course. But as a former NGO staff member, Red Cross delegate, UN staffer, cluster coordinator, and now advisor to a donor, I've come across fires in humanitarian settings more times than I care to recall. Sometimes they resulted from accidents. Sometimes they'd been intentionally set, but every time was a tragedy. I didn't used to know where to start. And until these guidelines were published, it was extremely rare that most humanitarians could identify, much less articulate, what fire risk management should look like. Reading and digesting them has helped me to appreciate for the first time the significance of the former gap in my humanitarian education. The Global Shelter Cluster Guidelines that Kindling is launching today add a great deal where previously fire risk management was only lightly addressed. These new guidelines can make huge contribution towards helping us to make shelter and settlements safer, and they can drive accountability to affected populations. In practical terms, they highlight best practices and help us to identify what's being missed, even for experts in one of the many intersecting fields with which Kindling's work is concerned. They can and should be used to advocate to host governments and to donors for safer conditions. They have the potential, in partnership with our CCCM and information management colleagues, to enable better service mapping. And I'd suggest that the guidelines can and now should be used as a benchmark for proposals. That humanitarians can use them for so much is thanks to a thoughtful, collaborative, and iterative development process. Kindling and the Construction Standards Working Group more broadly deserve real praise for having synthesized clearly so many interlinked technical inputs. The guidelines design means the reader needs no prior knowledge of fire management. I started giving fire more thought 4 years ago as a part of a group that met online regularly during lockdowns. Liz Palmer had worked on fire risk reduction projects in Lebanon with Save the Children, and it was she who brought the idea to the Construction Standards Working Group. Danielle, CEO of Kindling, of course, with extraordinary technical understanding of fire and the intersectional issues, she helped me to understand what needed to be done in order to manage risk effectively. And Jim Kennedy, who'd recently completed a project for DFID that involved laboratory testing of humanitarian plastic sheeting, had the better understanding of us of the how, I would suggest. Largely, we were all pretty assured of the value of our ideas even then, but we were really concerned about the potential barriers to delivering against them. We understood early that there are no silver bullet solutions, and we worried that it'd be hard to get buy-in. The issues are multi-sectoral and cross a range of expertise. So we were worried about legal, commercial, technical, architectural, urban planning, sociocultural, and other issues, all of which, incidentally, are addressed in these papers. But most of all, we were worried that because it's everyone's responsibility, it would remain no one's. And that's changed. Now, only the first part is true. There is a rapidly growing body of works to reduce fire risk across the humanitarian community that I think we can link to what Kindling has done. But at the same time, our collective task is growing. The risk of fire propagation rises with the temperature, and so too does the likelihood of displacement. Co-creating safe sites with the increasing number of displaced people will not be easy. People like Paul Knox Clark, Hugo Slim, and Sophie Thalstrup have all recently pointed to the increasingly worrisome gap in sufficient capacity in the humanitarian system to address rising global needs. To paraphrase Professor Alexander again, we're dealing with a context of proliferating technological failure, climate change, and mass migration. We've got the information to solve the problem. We have more science and more people working in risk reduction, but too few, he says, or paraphrasing, and too little science in response, especially when it comes to foresight on secondary hazards. But Kindling's papers are helping to address the gap of science in response. Delivering on the promise of the guidelines, however, is going to remain a big job. It's going to require materials translation. It's going to require information gathering, analysis, and meaningful sharing. We'll need to work with colleagues within and outside the shelter settlements and CCCM clusters to identify hotspots. And we'll want to contextualize the guidelines and to adjust our own project indicators. And dissemination of the guidelines is going to require donors putting them into our funding guidelines. So before I close, I want to thank the team for these multi-sectorially important guidelines, which helpfully disaggregate between settlement typologies and provide guidance applicable to each and to all. So thank you, Danielle, Helen, and all your co-workers at Kindling. Through concrete and measurable actions, you've given us the means to work with affected communities to improve safety for all. It's groundbreaking work being done by the lead agency in this space, and I'm proud we're supporting it alongside our friends at BHA. So thanks to all of you for your time and your attention. Over from me.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thanks indeed for supporting the initiative. It wouldn't be possible without the funding from the donors, but also the advice and knowledge and experience that you yourself bring as well to the table. With this, I will then move on to introduce Chuck Setchell. I don't know if he needs introduction as he's very well known in the sector. His current role is Senior Shelter Settlements and Hazard Mitigation Advisor at the USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, but we've known Shelter for many, many years. And it's truly an honor to introduce him. With a wealth of knowledge and experience in shelter and settlements, Charles will bring a unique perspective that is both insightful and inspiring. His dedication to the shelter and settlement sector has made lasting impact, and we are very fortunate to have him here today to share his expertise with us. He also has, I believe, a personal connection with the issue, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chuck, but I understand your son is a firefighter, so there is a little personal connection as well. And real pleasure to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm just getting over COVID, so my voice is just very raspier than usual. So bear with me. Thank you for that, Pablo, for the kind introduction, and thank you to the GSC for hosting the webinar, and to Kindling and so many others for developing the two documents that are being formally launched today. And thank you to all of those participating in the webinar, regardless of location and time zone. I think we're up over 80, which for me seems like a large number. So it's very impressive. It's an extraordinarily busy time, as you well know. So your presence is especially welcomed. It's very gratifying to see such interest in fire safety issues. And we at BHA hope that this interest only increases over time, in large part, hopefully, due to the work of Kindling and others. Perhaps more importantly, we at BHA hope heightened interest leads to more and more effective action on the ground to reduce fire risk. The subject of this seminar is very close to me personally for at least two reasons. Pablo mentioned one. Despite our reservations, my wife and I encouraged our oldest child to pursue his interest in becoming a firefighter, which he initiated during his first year at university a few years ago. Just started a new position with Washington, D.C. Fire Department in our nation's capital, where fire risk remains very real for thousands of households. So take his effort and my family's support of his important, though dangerous work as a sign of my personal commitment, and I think our Bureau's commitment to the promotion of fire safety and saving lives. Second, I was born and raised in Northern California and have seen firsthand the devastating destruction of thousands of square kilometers of forests and human settlements over the past several decades. The fires always seem to be followed by floods, of course, as watersheds damaged by fire couldn't hold water, leading to landslides and flooding and significant environmental degradation, loss of life and injuries, and widespread economic losses. Seeing these recurring and multi-hazard disasters as well as the many earthquakes I experienced growing up, and you talked about many multiple hazards, and the impacts they collectively generated prompted me at an early age to become interested in DRR work and HA. I didn't know the acronyms at the time, of course, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. So some of you may recall the wholesale destruction of that very aptly named California settlement called Paradise in 2018. Spent a lot of time there years ago. It broke my heart to see its demise. Paradise is not entirely lost, but it struggles even now to rise from the ashes. Sadly, however, many residents and economic activities will never be able to recover. This is often an impact of fire, underscoring the adverse intergenerational, multi-generational, and multi-sector impacts of fire on households and settlements. You don't need my experiences to know the fire risk is very real, with recent campfires in Bangladesh, Kenya, and Syria, and Nigeria, among many others, providing clear and irrefutable evidence that the risks are widespread and devastating. These disasters generate impacts not only in terms of deaths and truly horrifying injuries, but also loss of assets and livelihoods, reductions in assistance levels, and reputational harm to donors, humanitarian actors, and host country governments. Fire safety in the humanitarian assistance arena to date has generally been focused on camps and camp-like settings, and thus aligned with CCCM cluster activities. It's telling, therefore, that the two documents being launched by the GSC at least suggest a shift in focus beyond the camp settings into the larger context of humanitarian activity, namely those settlements, other settlements. This broader focus will enable donors and others to both better understand how fire risks impact settlements and how the context provided by this broader focus on both camps and other forms of settlements can in turn reduce fire risk. One challenge, and I think Phil alluded to this, to addressing fire risk has been its cross-cutting nature, much like debris management. It's everyone's problem and thus no one's problem. And no one wants to do it, even though it needs to be done. No one wants to pay for it, even though it needs to be paid for. We believe that fire risk reduction is ripe for greater support precisely because of its cross-cutting nature, as it can address the trifecta of currently high priority policies: climate change mitigation, localization, and the HDP nexus. One good example, one very concrete example of addressing all three priorities is improving local fire services, from outreach, training, service improvement, settlements planning, watershed management, and development of fire safety guidelines. Another challenge to promoting improved fire safety and addressing the trifecta of priorities is the current focus on camps, shelters, and NFIs. While exceedingly important to address and in need of continued attention and support, the two new reports highlight that there is far more to fire safety than fire breaks and stoves and fuel, or managing asbestos in fire settings, and shelter materials such as thatching and plastic sheeting. We've seen fuel that is inappropriate for the stoves being proposed, for example, such as coal that burns too hot for the stoves provided, causing both burn and fire risk, and fuel that is adulterated, such as LPG being diluted with diesel. We've also seen locally purchased plastic sheeting used in distributions that is often not fire retardant when safer, higher quality sheeting is available. These concerns will remain a challenge to address, more so if we seek to support a broader risk reduction agenda. Hopefully, our collective bandwidth will expand to address this broader range of issues. Fortunately, we don't need to create entirely new funding administrative mechanisms to address these challenges and respond to the issues presented in the two documents being discussed. In the case of BHA, implementing partners can move beyond stoves and fuel and fire breaks to include site planning, road and other service infrastructure design and layout, evacuation route planning, emergency vehicle access, preparedness activities, and increasing host community capacities to promote fire safety And we've done this in the past, but we need to do more. We need to do it by partners seeking funding through at least 2 of our 4 existing shelter and settlement sector subsectors, namely settlements and DRR. The key is making a convincing case for funding based on assessment of contextual conditions, framed through the settlements approach, and now informed by the 2 documents being issued by the GSC. Thank you again to the GSC and everyone involved in developing the new guidance on fire safety. Let's collectively inform our future work with a renewed and sharper focus on this form of risk reduction, so that creating safer shelter and safer settlements becomes less an aspiration and more a reality. Thank you again. Back to you, Pablo, and thank you so much, Kindling and others, for generating these reports. It's a major, major contribution to the sector. Thanks.
Thanks to you, Chuck, individually for agreeing to be with us and addressing us today, and also on behalf of BHA for the funding you've provided through the Global Shelter Cluster to this initiative and to many others. Okay, so we've reached the end of the presentations. I think if I hear a common message is the need and the importance for a careful contextualize. We've heard the context element is critical many times. Contextualize, integrated, risk-informed approach to fire safety that connects social, technical, and operational knowledge. We could even extrapolate that to not just to fire safety, but to humanitarian response at large, I would say. And I think it's key that we all understand that it's not a simple problem. It doesn't have easy solutions, and we need the expertise and involvement of a wide variety of actors. With that, we will open the floor for any questions, comments, reactions to whatever has been said or to the reports. The floor is open. Feel free also to put some questions in the chat. I would have one.
Not the time to lose Pablo.
It's so unlike Pablo to seize up. Never at a loss for words.
I'm sorry, not sure what happened there. Did you lose me? Don't know what my computer did. But I was about to ask the question, Helen, you said we cannot quantify the problem because nobody's collecting that data. I think every major not so major response I've been involved in, I have seen fire incidents. And I'm pleased. One of the things I noticed actually is that the report never uses the word accident. We always talk about incidents. These are not accidents. These are all preventable. No single life lost to fire should be acceptable because these are preventable. We can do things about this. And every response I've been to, I've seen this has happened. So it's fairly common. And it would be good to have an idea of the size of the problem to raise awareness about it. Is there a role for the clusters, the shelter cluster, the CCCM, to try and quantify this? Is there a recommendation in the report about that, or could that be something we can take on perhaps?
So if I can just come in quickly, and Danielle might have, and other people on the call might have some thoughts about this, but so from my kind of socio-technical perspective, I would love to see people engaging communities in this through it's got to be a trauma-informed kind of approach, but we should be thinking about how incidents are recorded. Should we, for example, be connecting with public health teams? This is a question that just I mull around in my head about how when people present with burns, is there an opportunity to have a conversation about how, you know, as an approach to kind of talking about where the burn came from, link to fire. There's definitely ways that we could be gathering more data, and also looking properly at how data is shared. There are some sections in the strategic recommendations about gathering of data, and the social scientist in me says, let's not just look at quantifiable data, because you don't, and you can record that something's happened. Where are you, like, what's the limit? Is it 4? Is it that 4 shelters burn and that's the only time a fire is deemed significant enough? Yeah, and what's the impact? As Phil said, the idea of recovery, from other research that we've done, it's really not addressed properly. So thinking, and you don't uncover that if you just record that an incident happened.
Thanks, Helen. Danielle, this is on the same question.
Yes, thank you. So to play off the social and the technical within Kindling, I'll then say, but wouldn't it be nice if we knew how many fires happened? Wouldn't it be nice if we knew the financial impacts, the other impacts that can be quantified? And from our experience, we see that there are agencies collecting some of this information, but these are in little pockets. They're pockets that we weren't able to get access to for this research, unfortunately. That's not without trying, I should mention. So I think there needs to be a real call for collaboration and for agencies to share what data they do have already, but also a more coordinated effort in order to collect data in a repeatable way and in a shareable way, so that as a sector, we can actually look across the entire issue. There's been a lot of discussions as well around investigation of fires. So in addition to looking at the number of incidences, trying to understand the causes of fire, how fires spread, what are the different factors that influence spread, if people are affected, it's difficult to speak of these things, but there's been fires where we've had multi-fatality fires, and actually trying to understand where people were trapped and passed can actually tell you a lot about how the fire is behaving and how response is interacting with that, whether it's a formal firefighting response or people's own individual responses at the community level. So there's a whole lot of possibilities out there on how we can better coordinate and collect data and share it. But there's also a lot of engagement needed with local governments and local actors, who often are the ones in positions to carry out investigations. So it certainly is a cross-cutting issue that covers on many pillars of humanitarian action. Thank you. Back over to you, Pablo.
Thank you, Danielle. I've got a couple of people with their hands raised and a few questions and comments in the chat as well. We'll try to accommodate as many as possible. If we don't have the time, I'll ask Helen and Danielle if we can maybe provide some written answers after the webinar and share them with those who participated. So over to Liz, who has hand raised, and then I'll take some questions from the chat as well.
Thank you so much, Pablo, and thank you everyone for your kind words. This has really been a labor of love working with you. From the first moment that I met Danielle as an Arab years ago, I knew something.
Liz, can you speak a little bit closer to the microphone so we can hear you louder?
Is that not working? It's give you some more
It is better. It is better if you speak close to the computer. Yes.
Better? Yeah, great. Okay. Yes, no, I wanted to say thank you everyone for the kind words. This project has been a labor of love since when I first met Danielle years ago at Arup, where Save the Children had been engaging in some very, very high level fire safety work in Lebanon as a result of the statistics that were coming out of the data there. Lebanon is an unusual context because it is such a contained refugee crisis. It's a prolonged and a very, very complex environment where we have actually got very good access to data. And what came out of it, and was very pointedly a call to action for Save the Children, was that more than 50% of the injuries and deaths were children under the age of 5. That was an astounding piece of data that catalyzed us to put in place what we called it was a fire risk reduction program. It was a multi-sector, multi-stakeholder. We addressed the risks and gaps from the top at governance level through the agency and interagency refugee response, right down to educating children and refugees and communities about what their accountabilities are. Children now know who to call when there's a fire. Leadership knows what to do to evacuate a camp. The civil defense knows how to respond and who to call. And we have NGOs that are standing by with emergency relief items to support. Not only that, but we have advanced so much that Save the Children has, through very kind donorship from some of the donors here on this call, experimented with some groundbreaking and very successful programs to put in place things like fire breakers, where between shelters we've actually built rock wool walls that has proved to stop fire spread in the shelter and in the settlements in Lebanon. This project just carries on and on. I can't even begin to tell you the progress that we've been able to make and how proud I am today that we were able to put this project in place, because the biggest challenge that we've had is putting it into one document to prove to everybody the full scope of risk and actually the full scope of potential actions that we can all take. And many of these things are not expensive. It just takes collective action. So I really want to thank everyone here, and also the partners in the Construction Good Standards Working Group. There were only 3 of us, and we worked tirelessly to get the standards out. Fire safety, disaster risk reduction, resilience, climate change, all of these things are embedded in leadership around safe programming for construction. And it's a really, really huge mandate that goes way beyond just the physical space of shelter and settlements. It is everyone's accountability. We encourage all sectors to respond to this risk. We have the greatest number of fires in our education locations, in fact, ironically, and of course that's a very high risk environment. And we see even with our own agencies, warehouses, fires, you only have to look at the Beirut blast to know what the damage and the devastation for that can be. There is an absolute, I mean, in any direction that you turn yourself, there are millions of very small and very effective things that we can collectively do to enact fire safety in our settlements. And what is so fantastic about this report and the guidance is that it looks at all aspects of fire safety, but as Helen said, social aspect, but also the physical infrastructure, the regulatory environment, and of course working directly with the communities to make sure that they are as invested in this process as we are. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Liz. I'll take a question from the chat, and thank you all for your contributions. They're very interesting contributions. Some are not necessarily questions, but sharing or responding to some of the things that are being said that are useful. There's a question from Claire Hand on how should we monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of our fire safety interventions? Is there any guidance in what we should measure or consider? Perhaps it was linked a little bit to my previous question on if we don't know the size of the problem, how can we measure we are making progress? Is there anything in the guidance on that or in the report? Or from your experience?
I'm just waiting to see if Helen wants to take this or if I should.
It's completely up to you. I was going to, one of the things that we say, this relates to one of the strategic recommendations, is that, as you say, Pablo, we need to know the size of the problem, what success would look like, what types of interventions, what are you aiming to do with a particular type of intervention? And yeah, we talk a lot. We've got a strategic recommendation around that, but I think Danielle has more specifics, and I'm going to look at it.
Let's keep it short because we have little time left, Danielle.
Okay, yeah, very short. So I will say it's very difficult to measure change in fire risk and fire safety because we don't have the baseline data. So we do have to come up with more creative ways for measuring evaluation around looking at certain programs or fire risk assessment approaches that can be carried out. There's a lot more thinking behind that we're hoping to work with different groups in the sector to define collectively. This work is very much around establishing the baseline and trying to invite others to come into this space and work with us on those types of things. So, thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Jocelyn had her hand up, but she's lowered it, so I presume she no longer wants to pose the question, or it has been answered.
Oh, sorry about
yes.
that. It was just a response in the chat saying to put it in the chat. But
Go
first
ahead.
of all, I just wanted to thank everybody from Kindling as well as Global Shelter Cluster for putting together this presentation as well as developing these documents. I've completed my master's thesis on wildfire disaster risk reduction, so I found these documents incredibly crucial. My question has to do with what challenge did you come across when developing effective guidance across various contexts and shelter and settlements? And how did you find a way to mitigate these challenges, as every context is different?
We might need another webinar to answer that, but over to you, Danielle, if you're brave enough to address it. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of benchmark this to what was currently out there. I think Chuck spoke about the current status, which is that we have fire breaks and we have separation distances between dwellings. Okay, so these are very high level conservative things that we're using to look at fire safety from a single lens. We are offering a more holistic approach in the guidance, but it is definitely not as far as you can push the guidance. So much more work is needed to understand how fire is experienced differently, behaves differently, you know, how the frequency changes based on so many different factors. This really is us bringing in as much knowledge as is readily available into
The same bag that took my computer has taken Danielle's now. But Helen, if you could please prepare the.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Sorry, I'm not sure where I cut off.
Yes, it's okay, Danielle. We hear you now. But if you can wrap it up, we will then show the animation, and Brett Moore, the Global Shelter Cluster Coordinator on behalf of UNHCR, will wrap it up after the animation. So Danielle,
Thank you, Pablo. I have no idea where I cut out, but I was just saying there's so much more we can do. We have other projects that we're already beginning to push this guidance further. We'd like to welcome you to join us in that effort. It's not just a global shelter cluster issue, it's certainly cross-cluster, cross-sector. So yeah, the short answer is we've brought it further than it had been before, but there's a lot further to go.
And if anybody wants to be involved in helping us think through the different parts of the guidance, and I'm actually just sending an invitation to Claire, for example, to work out how to make contextualized guidance around monitoring and evaluation. This is what the Indaba is supposed to be there for, to get people to be able to have a space where we can properly work out what the sector needs and do it properly from this point forward.
thank you, Helen. Yes. So for those who want to continue the conversation through that community of practice, we will share further details how to join the Indaba. And we will quickly show you a 1-minute video that promotes this fire safety report before Brett, who, by the way, is ending his tenure as the Global Shelter Cluster Coordinator. Will close the event, but Helen.
Many of the actions we take in humanitarian responses unintentionally create fire risk. It's time to do more to prevent fires. Fire safety in the humanitarian sector is everyone's responsibility. Whether a shelter specialist in CCCM or focusing on education or health, there's something you can do to ensure affected populations don't experience the devastation and trauma of fire. Fires cause injury, loss of life, and damage wherever they happen, whether in homes or agency buildings. These fires significantly impact our ability to provide humanitarian assistance. Think fire safety, prevention, preparedness, mitigation, response, recovery. There's so much you can do.
Thank you.
The folding swivel stand is silky smooth
That
to
is not
use,
part of our
allowing you to
promotional
enjoy
video.
a high-quality entertainment and work experience.
Okay. So just let me check, Brett, if you are in the call and would like to do the closing remarks. And thank you very much to Brett. This is his last day in his capacity as Global Cluster Coordinator on behalf of UNHCR. He's made a tremendous contribution to the sector, to the cluster and to the sector. And he will be sorely missed. Even at his very last day, he's willing to share with us his thoughts and wrap up the event. Thank you so much, Brett, on behalf of all of the cluster partners and the sector for all your commitment and dedication to the role. And I certainly hope that you will remain within the humanitarian sector and shelter as well, so that we can continue to benefit from your experience and knowledge. Over to you, Brett.
Thanks, Pablo. That's extremely kind, and thank you for the introduction. I'm sorry I wasn't available for the entire presentation, but I did get the last 20 minutes or half an hour, and you know, it is a really fascinating and integrated presentation that was given. Thanks very much to all the colleagues from Kindling, to Helen, Danielle, Patrick, and others that have added their contributions, and certainly Chuck from BHA and Phil from FCDO as well. Thank you very much. I mean, it really is through the support of the donors that this kind of work happens. It contributes to a whole range of DRR aspects, as you said, Chuck. And, you know, if without sounding too introspective, if I might even just also acknowledge, you know, recent fires in Bangladesh, as you said, Chuck, but, you know, I was there at the beginning of that, you know, remember the establishment of Manik Farm in northern Sri Lanka, probably 2006, 2007, and, you know, East Timor before that. And so we've made progress on a lot of things, and I echo your thoughts when you said it's more than just a bucket of sand and a windbreak in between plastic sheeting or shelters. And I think that the key issues that were highlighted there by Kindling, especially the 15 recommendations, I thought that was a really effective way of integrating, you know, the socio-economic, the cultural, and the other aspects into this kind of behavioural reality. And we all know from our own field experience that even if you try something once in one place and it works there, it does not easily work in another place again. So even building up behaviours and cultural understanding, I think, is something that, you know, we have to leverage through other sectors as well, through protection, through CCCM, and that, as was mentioned. And certainly, finally, just, you know, being an Australian and coming from an extremely and increasingly bushfire-prone country, and having grown up in a rural area where I've witnessed it firsthand, the horrors of fire, I think, is something that are really underestimated. The loss of life, the threat to life, the physical damage, but also just the emotional and trauma for the individual, the family, and a wider community that takes decades to recover from, let alone those that are exacerbated by being victims of internal displacement or refugees as well. I mean, this is really critical knowledge here that we have that crosses over the refugee context. I see Vasiliki online from UNHCR, the new Human Settlements Officer. So, you know, I'm not wanting to put you on the spot, but I know that these are issues that you're certainly looking at on the UNHCR side. There's more than 400 or so refugee camps with millions of people living in them. So no matter what context we look at, there's a variety of occupation conditions that really do need a huge amount of effort across the system. So I'll leave it at that. I hope that was a wrap up of the key elements. Thanks again to Pablo. Thanks again to all the colleagues online. Many of you I've known for many, many years. It's been a pleasure to work with you and to serve you as the co-lead for the Global Shelter Cluster. We'll see what my next steps are. But I must admit, I'm very, very pleased to hand over the co-leadership from the UNHCR side to Seki Hirano. So Seki, if you're there, maybe turn your camera on and give a big wave. Many of you will know Seki as well. He's been with CRS for many years, but also been a practitioner in the field for a long time and someone who's very, very familiar and accustomed with this work. So we'll leave it very, very capable and probably even improved hands with a handover to Seki. So thank you all very much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you all. To be continued.
Thanks, Pablo. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Take care, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Pablo.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.